As healthcare moves away from traditional fee-for-service models, providers need a strategy to stay competitive. That's where Strategic Healthcare Partners comes in. We offer expert consulting and ongoing management oversight for providers looking to form an accountable care organization. From financial feasibility analysis to helping you choose the right ACO in a crowded market, SHP provides the clarity you need to make informed decisions and transition to value-based care. Learn more at shpllc.com.
Welcome to Beyond the Stethoscope, Vital Conversations with SHP. Our week-long Season 2 kickoff concludes with a thought-provoking episode. Are you ready to explore the future of healthcare delivery and quality of care? Join Jason and I as we delve into the world of retailers entering the healthcare space. Retail giants like Amazon, Walmart, and Best Buy have promised to shake up the industry, but what does this actually mean for healthcare? In Season 1, we touched on these developments, but now it's time to delve deeper. Get ready for an insightful and engaging conversation as we examine the potential impact of these new retailers on the healthcare landscape. Only on Beyond the Stethoscope. Well, hey there, Jason. Thanks for sitting down with me today.
Hey, Aaron, how are you?
Doing good. So I know that this is a big week for us. We're kicking off Season 2. Earlier this week, we heard from Mike, John, and Kelly about some of the disruptions that are happening specifically in the world of ASCs and value-based care. But I think we should pivot a little bit and talk about one of the other big disruptions going on. That's retailers entering into the healthcare space. I think we've already seen it with the likes of CVS. They opened their Minute Clinics years ago. But now we're starting to see this growth in from the more traditional retailers or even the new modern e-tailers like Amazon, Best Buy, Walmart, just to name a few who've entered into this space. And I think this bears a conversation around that. We've hinted towards this being a thing, and in the last season we talked about in our news segments, Amazon is doing this in this space, and it's worth keeping an eye on. But I want to dig a little bit deeper. So if you have a few minutes, I'd like to talk to you some more about this.
Yeah, tell you what, if you don't mind, I'll just go ahead and dive right into it.
Yeah, give us like the 10,000 foot view of this.
Well, I feel like what we saw last year, as you and I were talking through it, it became quite clear that these bigger retailers, the big box retailers, or even the online folks, it was starting to become more clear that was about two things: primary care and telehealth. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then so this vagueness where we saw, Zoom even get into it a couple of years ago with integration with, I think it was Cerner, right, in terms of being able to provide telehealth. It's become even a little bit more clear that, okay, this is about primary care and telehealth. And what I found interesting in looking at various studies, for example, from Forbes, is they even predict that retail health clinics will double their share of the primary care market. And so even from their studies where they showed that retail health clinics by itself, if I read this correctly, grew by over 21% just during the COVID era. Okay, I say the COVID era, 2019 through 2020, just in the preliminary stages there, you saw, because of COVID-19 testing sites, that those sites were starting to grow. And so the average patient like you and I started to affiliate, Walmart, Walgreens, CVS, et cetera, with initial primary care needs, right? And so there's a lot of sort of support that you're going to start seeing the retail clinic market dominate a little bit more, or sort of dovetail more towards primary care. And just in 2022 alone, there was a $3.5 billion value placed on retail primary care when you consider CVS, Aetna, Walgreens, Walmart, Amazon, et cetera. So it's kind of interesting and helpful to see that there's sort of a now more defined trend when we talk about those, right?
Yeah, I find it interesting. So you mentioned Amazon. I think Amazon's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. They're they're starting to flex their muscles, but we were confused late last summer, early in the fall when we were doing the first season of the podcast. Amazon unexpectedly announced that they were ending Amazon. I think it was Amazon Care, and it was their telehealth service. And they ended it at the end of the year. It ended December 31st. And it kind of left everybody, myself included, going, well, are they going to play in this space or not? Because at the same time, they're also seemingly moving other chess pieces around the board in preparation to offer primary care services. I'm kind of curious and maybe just get your thoughts on this and maybe some of the things that you've read. How is Amazon going to play in this space if they've ended their telehealth services? Are they going to start building brick and mortar? Or what do you think they're going to do? They seem poised to do something.
Definite trend that there's going to be a presence they want to establish in primary care, but it feels like, along with Mark Cuban, for example, we've seen a lot of noise there that he and Jeff Bezos have both sort of decided in their own garage, if you will, that pharmacy is where they want to start making the splash.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Amazon just rolled out the RX pass for $5 a month or something like that.
right. And I'll tell you, it's interesting just from a, almost again, from a patient's perspective, forget that we're in this industry, but that drew my attention as a patient to go look online to see where I could save some pharmacy costs within my own household was related to that. So therefore, it just sort of stuck in my head as, wow, it's kind of making an impact, and that's where their focus is probably going to be a little bit more. You even had Mark Cuban, I was reading recently, where the designation, PBC designation, that public corporation offering. Mark Cuban did it. Allidade's done it. A few others where they are starting to want to tie their for-profit, nonprofit worlds together and say, we're tying our corporations to our mission. And I think that made a little bit of noise out there as well, that, hey, he's in it really to sort of make a splash on the pharmacy side. So, yeah, back to your question, I definitely think there's more of a trend in the pharmaceutical space than what we saw previously.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be more curious, other points that kind of direct itself back to the retail space. We talked about this, you and I, a lot last year on these kind of news segments, that the economic environment, what impact is that going to have, right? And so, again, the same Forbes article that caught my attention is you have just last year alone, Chapter 11 bankruptcies for large healthcare organizations were in the 30% environment. Rural hospitals are greater than 30% at risk for closure. And so what's that mean? Those patients have to go somewhere or seek their care somewhere or somehow, in the natural fit is that retailer space, whether they go to Walmart. Somebody's going to Walmart, somebody's going to Dollar General, right? We all are going somewhere. Or we're going on Amazon to look at pharmacy costs. And if the economic environment is causing folks to not be able to seek their health care where they currently are because of rural hospital closures, et cetera, it get to your point about Amazon. Everybody's going to Amazon. I just think that the economic downturn now versus just a personal hit, it's hitting those we go seek our care from.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got to be, that void has to be filled somehow by someone else. And it just feels like it's going to be the big box retailer or the Amazons of the world.
Another thing to take into account is the shrinking rural areas. You talked about the hospital closures in the rural areas, but we have seen a trend, and it was specifically highlighted in the 2020 census. The populations are shifting once again aggressively towards the urban and suburban environments away from the rural environments. So these rural healthcare clinics are going to be harder and harder and fewer to come by, just naturally as demographics shift. So I think to deliver healthcare to those who stay rural, because there still will be people who want to live out in the rural areas, and if my wife had her way, we'd certainly be living about 50 miles from anywhere. And there are those who want to live there, but they still need healthcare. And I look at the Amazon, I even look at the Walmarts and the Dollar Generals, those that are starting to play in this space. Well, they have a rural presence almost automatically. So I don't know. Looking in my crystal ball here, it really wouldn't surprise me if someday in the future Amazon offers house visits with some kind of primary care, maybe a nurse practitioner or something, just like we see those Prime vans rolling around delivering packages all day. Even in rural areas, you can get a package delivered to you in 2 days. Could we, and I almost want to predict, will we see that sort of thing happen where a nurse practitioner is delivered for a house call, again, 50 miles from nowhere? I think that might be ultimately what we end up with. What's your thoughts on that? Have I broken into the RX prescription bottles here? Or?
Well, I tell you, it's funny, as you're talking through that, two things popped in my head. One was CMS itself recognizes some of what you were talking about there of rural healthcare by way of the REH, the Rural Emergency Hospital, the rulings that were coming out last year from that, even though in our state of Georgia, we did not receive a lot of favorability towards it simply because of what you have to give up as a hospital in order to comply with that ruling, and then the reimbursement vagueness around it. So even though it wasn't adopted, the fact that CMS recognizes and was trying to issue out rulings to get that sort of transition of rural hospitals into that designation tells you right there that even they recognize that there's some issues on the rural healthcare settings on the hospital side, and that speaks to the 30% closure rate we're looking at. So yeah, there's that bent of it. And then the other half you mentioned, and the names escape me of the vendors, but we talked about briefly last year. You had those couple of firms we read about that were sort of, doctors in a minivan, right?
Mm-hmm.
The ones where you could call, that was a new form of home health. In fact, I think it was over in Blue Cross Blue Shield of California, engaged one of those vendors to help with such a thing. And so when you combine that with the Amazon perspective, like you just laid out, and even folks in those environments are going to access, it's sort of, you're starting to see things point in that direction, right? If the rural hospitals are closing, where are they getting their care from? If they can't get somewhere, someone's got to come to them. And so, yeah, I agree with you 100% that if there's not a Dollar General, Walmart close by, they've got to log in and go to Amazon for some of these services.
Yeah, and I say Amazon because I feel like Amazon has the network in place. Both literally, they have the vehicles, but they have the infrastructure there to offer those sort of dock in a box type service where they can go and do house calls. And sure, they're not going to be seeing 50 patients in a day, but potentially there's money there. CMS has indicated that they're willing to invest more into home health because outcomes are typically better. The patient experience is typically better, and everything seems to be typically better. It also seems to me too, everything old is new again, right? 100, 150 years ago, doctors going to the house, and I use the term doctors broadly. Maybe I should be using the word providers. Will go to your house, and we're seemingly coming back to that again. I see that as certainly being something of use and value more for the rural areas, but also too, I'm work from home. If I could have the doctor come to me or a provider come to me, I'd be more than happy to do that. I mean, shoot, I have lunch delivered to my door. Why not my healthcare? So kind of pivoting from that a little bit, I want to talk about one of the other more unexpected entries into the healthcare sphere, but Best Buy, specifically around their Geek Squad entering into providing healthcare monitoring service. What's your thoughts on that, and where do we see that growing?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? I'll tell you, that one caught me off guard more than any other that we talked about last year. It was kind of quiet in terms of how they rolled that out, right? To me, that's one of those little more niche consumer brand loyalty plays, right? I'm not sure I'm just not sure how a Best Buy kind of makes its mark off of that, as much as sort of a vertical move on their end. I think it's just another added service to their current consumer loyalty than it is adding new revenue streams by way of new, patients in their case, or, consumers as it would be with a Best Buy. I just can't picture that as much as a Walmart making a dent or a Dollar General.
Yeah, I would say certainly there's a Venn diagram between what Best Buy and specifically the Geek Squad excel in, technology, electronics, and healthcare devices. There's certainly an overlap there. And speaking as someone who was the IT guy for private practice for a very long time, there was plenty of times where I was helping to fix a treadmill because it had a computer in it. So there's certainly an overlap there, but I would say that's the most unexpected. I'm going to be keeping an eye on that one because it was so surprising. You have to think that such surprising moves are going to have potentially surprising outcomes. It could be bad in terms of, Best Buy ceases to exist because they've invested so much money in this sphere, but I don't know. It feels like that this could also be really disruptive on the delivery of technology that's health related too.
To your last point there, CVS, who acquired Signify Health, which is kind of the analytics technology arm, you had, like we've talked about before, Cerner and Zoom, those are other technology sort of angles to, or partnerships or acquisitions. I think the Best Buy is maybe a slightly different bent to it. Now, what is it? 40% of U.S. adults or something like that, admit to having chronic conditions. And so then you therefore need more technology needs around remote patient monitoring and that sort of thing. Yeah, there is sort of this technology bent that I think folks are still trying to decide what angle they want to take. Do they want the Best Buy angle? Do they want to do what CVS did with Signify? Do you want to, acquire or partner somebody in the RPM space? Like what? Now the technology bent in healthcare has so many swim lanes to it. Like which one are you going to partner with by way of acquisition has just become such a large pool.
Completely changing gears here. We've talked about the trends towards retailization of the healthcare space. Yeah, and generally speaking, I think it brings some really good things, some very positive things to the table in terms of access to care and that sort of thing. But what do you feel, Jason? And I'll answer this question too. What do you feel might be some of the cons, some of the downsides of retailers entering into this space?
Well, it reminds me, you go back to AOL Time Warner many years ago, right? And on its surface, it sounded like a great marriage made and blah, blah, blah.
Oh, yeah, it was a match made in heaven, wasn't it?
Match made in heaven. And I was an AOL shareholder at the time. I can remember thinking, what's this going to be? And boy, big regrets there. You just had two different mindsets, two different sort of niches of industry that did not really understand the other for long-term success, right? To me, that's just a big con is what's the leadership understanding of a CVS who's entering, they've got Aetna, right? There's a different consumer, there's different pricing transparency. When you go buy something from a CVS, it's much different than dealing with an Aetna when you go see your primary care provider and all the nuances of, reimbursement mechanisms that we deal with in the managed care setting than as a consumer and a retailer. So to me, the biggest con is how do the worlds collide of basic consumer finance and healthcare finance? I spent a couple years in aerospace finance, and I remember thinking, wow, I got so bored coming from healthcare into it because it was almost a debit credit sort of mentality. But it's not like that in healthcare, as we all know. To me, I'm not sure it's a big con, but I just feel like maybe that could lead to some failures, right? And I'll be interested in what that looks like.
Yeah, or at least perceived or early failures, specifically with how medicine is reimbursed. If we're looking purely at a reimbursement rate, it can be months before you're paid, which is much different than in the retail space where it's a transaction that instantly happens. So that's I think something potentially too, where these retailers are going to have big drawdowns on their balance sheets every quarter in their quarterly earnings call, and they're having to say, oh, we lost $1 billion here, but that's because they have $1 billion that they're waiting to be paid on. I'm throwing out a number there, but potentially that could harm some of these publicly traded companies. I think another con too, to think about, not necessarily on the money side, but on the patient experience side, right? You know your PCP. You've seen your PCP for years. They know you. They know your idiosyncrasies. They know what your baselines are. Oh, your cholesterol might be a little high for average, but for you it's normal. And those are the sort of things that you get through experience with your provider. I guess my fear with retail provided healthcare is you lose all that. And healthcare can't be cookie cutter. And every time you walk into your Walmart, every staff member you see is probably new, or at least you haven't seen them before. And it's a constant churn of people, and they don't know you, you don't know them. I fear that may happen with the over-retailization of healthcare, where you go in for the sniffles, and then a few months later you go in for your annual wellness check, and you're seen by entirely different people, and the whole staff has changed over, and you lose that knowledge about who you are as a patient. So I know we have charts, but it all comes down to good documentation. And I know if I go see my doctor, he's going to ask me about what's happening in my life, and he knows me, who I am. And I think that's really important. And I fear you lose that in a retail type setting. Is that necessarily a bad thing? I don't think so. But I also see retail only delivery of healthcare being ultimately not a net negative per se, but definitely not a net positive. Maybe a net neutral. People will still get healthcare, but is it as good as that relationship? Because I don't see relationships forming in a retail setting of healthcare.
Yeah, definitely. I fully agree. I think it's more complementary or supplementary, meaning we talked about this last year, right? The first season about shortages in staffing, and how can retail medicine, how can telehealth fill that void of an aging primary care physician market, nursing shortages. We think it can be of great help. There's the trust factor. We learned during COVID that when we said the word access, especially in the rural setting, it wasn't as much a physical access as much as it was just trusting your provider when it came to COVID vaccines and the things of that nature. I think that carries over to just everyday medicine. And that, to your point, are you going to trust somebody in a lab coat or not, or a white coat in a CVS shop just because they wear that? Some will, some won't. I think it comes down to the relationship, to your point. So I agree. I think it fills it's complementary or supplementary nature. It's going to fill a need. It's going to fill a void. And for folks like myself, it's going to be an easy to access in and out mechanism, whether it's flu vaccine or prescription. That's going to be where I go versus the relationship, like you're saying, for other needs.
Yeah, a really good stopgap, almost the way that we use urgent clinics today. Urgent clinics are a little bit more severe cases. So if you're going to the Amazon clinic or the Walmart clinic, or fill in the blank, the Best Buy clinic, you're only going in for a quick flu shot or a runny nose, sort of non-normal care. I would say particularly annual wellness checks, more complicated care really should be still provided with the same clinician whenever possible. And I don't think you're going to ultimately get that from a retail setting. Okay, so we don't end on a down note. I don't want to end on a down note. I think it's important that we talk about, let's talk about costs and how this could drive down costs, because I see this as a potential of driving down the cost of healthcare. We talk about that a lot. And, when we start talking about cost of healthcare, we also start talking about things like, expansion of Medicaid and Medicare eligibility changes and of course the dreaded single payer conversation. How do you think, and do you think it will have a positive effect on driving down costs, these retailers entering into the space? Does it make it more competitive?
Oftentimes you would think that, right? Competitions a lot of times will either increase quality and or reduce costs, whatever the industry is. I do think you gotta sort of partner that with value-based care trends, right? And respective reimbursement mechanisms in place with such arrangements, because that too is to improve, the triple aim, improve quality, reduce cost. So you've got to think, especially on the pharmacy side, that to me is where the first impact is going to be felt on the cost savings potential. Mm-hmm. The other side you got to look at those, how will that also relate to improved quality? Am I getting prescribed the right thing for quality, or am I just seeking it because of the cost? Am I going somewhere else just to find it where it's cheaper, kind of thing? And so I do think also you got to keep into account, was it a fourth of all adult Americans don't even have a primary care provider? They do not have that. And so I think it fills that void, which is more important than worrying so much about on the cost side. I would think that the lack of a primary care provider and our movement towards quality has to be looked at more so than the cost side, because I do get more worried on the quality side of these retail movements. Again, when I go get that, whether it's been the vaccines and I go in and it's just somebody in a white coat behind the counter at CVS giving it to me, I'm a little bit more hesitant than when I'm at my primary care physician. For some reason, it's just a natural thing.
Particularly when they get a running start towards you with the needle, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, I think you raise a valid point. It is more about quality. And I got to thinking just now too. So if we have all of these people who they don't have a primary care. 25% of adult Americans don't have a PCP. If today those 25% were to magically decide, I'm going to go get a PCP, our current healthcare system, we don't have enough providers for all those people. So I think you're right. I think any fear of this potentially driving away business from doctors and existing clinics may be unfounded. There's such a big gap of people not getting any care that even if they're getting their care at a Minute Clinic or Amazon Care or Walmart Care, it's probably a good thing ultimately for their outcomes and ultimately a good thing for everybody in America, because a healthier America is better for all. So yeah, I think you're right. It's going to be more about quality than money. I know we're coming right up on time. Anything else you want to look in our crystal balls about before we sign off?
Well, here we are starting off a new year, right? And a lot of unknowns coming our way. I'll be inclined to think we'll be watching the retail space closely throughout the year, because that's obviously making an impact in different worlds. We saw it last year, as you and I talked about a lot. I'm going to be most curious at what new relationships we see outside of CVS and Aetna, for example, that we'll see in 2023. But I'm excited to hear what we come across next. Looking forward to season 2.
Yeah, I am too. So everyone, in case you didn't get the memo, we are doing a little bit different this season. So every other week we'll be doing news segments, and then the intervening weeks we'll be doing our interviews. So we're kind of splitting it up, trying out a different wardrobe, so to speak. So be sure to reach out to us on our website if you have any feedback about that. If you like it, you don't like it, you think we should do something different, we'd love to hear from you. All right, Jason, I think that's it for our time today. Thanks for sitting down with me and kind of pondering the future of healthcare.
Enjoyed it. Looking forward to season 2 and talking with everybody.
All righty. You have a good one.
Thanks.
You've been listening to Beyond the Stethoscope, Vital Conversations with SHP, a production of Strategic Healthcare Partners.
For more information about our podcast, including back episodes, show notes, transcripts, and more, visit our website at shpllc.com/podcasts.
And I know you've heard it before, but please consider rating our podcast in your favorite podcast app. It helps make others aware of the show.
And our podcast wouldn't be possible without our wonderful team of folks.
Editing and production assistance by Nyla, Wiebe, and myself, Aaron Higgins.
And your episode hosts are Aaron Higgins and myself, Jason Crosby.
Our social media coordinator is Jeremy Miller.
Our executive producers are also our principals, Mike Scribner and John Crew.
For more from SHP, consider following us on social media, including Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn.
And as always, thank you for listening and have a great, wonderful day.
You already know that understanding your data is key to improving patient outcomes and financial performance. But how? At Strategic Healthcare Partners, our analytics services help turn your EMR and other data sources into actionable insights. From identifying areas for improvement to guiding you through implementing changes, SHP supports you every step of the way. Our performance analytics service dives even deeper, providing custom reports that help you stay ahead in the transition to value-based care. Unlock your data's full potential with SHP. Learn more at shpllc.com.